Well, welcome. Thank you for joining us in the Fallout shelter as we are just waiting out the zombie apocalypse.
Have you been watching The Last of Us?
I actually haven't.
Okay,
I
neither.
just wanted a different.
I am interested
beginning.
though. Yeah.
Yeah, hopefully this has captured you. Yeah, thanks for joining us as we go through the parables through our. I actually forgot the title of it. Folk Tales and Fables.
Yes.
And we're just going to jump into the parable of the lost sheep and the parable of the coin. And so, just to kind of note, so hopefully you're just going to make all the changes with us as we go through this parable. One is these parables are found together in Luke 15, but also just the parable of the lost sheep by itself, with no other parable, no lost coin, is actually found in Matthew 18. So again, this is especially that one parable. The parable of the lost sheep. This is Jesus using the same story with some slight variances to a different audience. Kind of making the same point again. Because he's in the one case of the Matthew, he's talking to his disciples essentially. Sure. In Luke, he's talking to religious leaders, Pharisees, and
it's in response to their criticism of his hanging around with what they would call sinners and Gentiles.
And tax collectors.
Yeah, well, especially tax collectors,
right. Yeah. So we're just going to kind of jump into those little differences in those specific parables, but then we'll come together the two parables, the lost coin, lost sheep, and just sort of do that too. So first with Matthew's account, then we're going to read that one first. His audience, again, we just said, is his disciples. At the beginning of chapter 18, they're asking the question that they seem to really be curious about, but who is the greatest in the kingdom of heaven? That's
come up a few times, and Jesus has told parables in response to that. So
yeah, well, it really speaks to a lot of the social hierarchy.
Yeah,
the kind of that would have been present in that time,
and we don't have any of that today.
Not at all.
Yeah,
we've thankful that the zombie apocalypse has completely wiped that out. No, it's still unfortunately a thing we have to work a lot through.
Totally.
But he answers by telling them to be like a child. Mm-hmm. And he's not pointing to the innocence of a child at this point. He's pointing to more of the humility and the vulnerability of the child because they're low on the social ladder, especially at that time. I mean, they were hopefully one day, but they would grow and they would become whatever the adults and the landowners and all that sort of stuff. But right at this point, they've got really no voice.
Yeah, we've elevated children in our society at a much higher level, which isn't necessarily bad. But they had no real social status at all until they became of an inheritance age. Yeah. So even if their parents died, they would still be kept by other people who would have control of their inheritance until they came to be of adult.
Yeah, they were completely dependent.
Yeah, and they really didn't have any means or ways of accomplishing anything without their parents' help. So
that's right. So and so Jesus will be very blunt, I would say. Don't cause them to sin. Don't cause them to go astray. Don't look down on them. They are important. And then this parable kind of comes as a result of a lot of that. And so why don't you take this one?
So this is Matthew
18,
verse 12. If a man has 100 sheep and one of them wanders away, what will he do? Won't he leave the 99 others on the hill and go out and search for the one that is lost? And if he finds it, I tell you the truth, he will rejoice over it more than over the 99 that didn't wander away. In the same way, it is not my heavenly Father's will that even one of these little ones should perish. And we'll compare that to Luke.
Yeah, and so Luke's account, Luke 15, this goes to 3 to 10, and we're gonna go right in from the parable of the lost sheep. We'll go right into talking about the lost coin or sharing the lost coin at this point. But at this point, he's talking to religious leaders who are complaining about who Jesus is associating with. Therefore, the tax collectors and notorious sinners.
Yeah,
and it's kind of a similar idea in that where children were seen as having no social status. The people that the religious leaders worried about would be the people who have bad social status.
Yes, exactly.
They were the wrong people to be hanging out with. And so here we're starting at verse 3. So Jesus told them this story. If a man has 100 sheep and one of them gets lost, what will he do? Won't he leave the 99 others in the wilderness and go search for the one that is lost until he finds it? And when he has found it, will he not joyfully carry it home on his shoulders? When he arrives, he will call his friends and neighbors, saying, 'Rejoice with me, because I have found the lost sheep.' In the same way, there is more joy in heaven over one lost sinner who repents and returns to God than over the 99 others who are righteous and haven't strayed away." And then moving into the lost coin, or suppose a woman has 10 silver coins and loses one. Won't she light a lamp and sweep the entire house and search carefully until she finds it? And when she finds it, she will call in her friends and neighbors and say, "Rejoice with me, because I have found my lost coin." In the same way, there is joy in the presence of God's angels, even when one sinner repents.
So that's interesting. And in both of these cases, again, I think Jesus is using hyperbole here. We're really seeing this sort of extravagant reaction to the recovery of something ordinary.
Yeah, and even just sort of like one of, in the sheep, it's one of 99.
Yeah.
You feel just sort of like, well, you lost one. You got 99. You're good.
Yeah,
Or even in the coins, you got 10.
Yeah.
You had 10. You lost one. You had 9 left. Like, yeah, it's a loss, but
Yeah, so Jesus is making the point that the people who are vulnerable, or in the first case, children themselves, are still very important.
Very important.
Yeah.
And so let's just quickly look at the parable of the lost sheep. We have both Matthew and Luke are pointing, to the lost sheep as those who are looked down upon. Those regarded as unimportant, which would be in Matthew's case.
Yeah.
Or unworthy, which is where Luke
is going. Yeah.
And so where the emphasis kind of differs. Joe Capolio writes, Luke emphasizes the joy that followed the recovery of the lost sheep, whereas Matthew emphasized the concern that none of the vulnerable members should be lost. And I think those are two really things that we should take time to really ponder. The idea again of the joy of somebody who's come back into community with Jesus. And then the idea of hey, there are vulnerable people, and if we should hopefully want them to not ever be astray as a result of somehow vulnerability, but even the want to make sure that they can safely come back.
And there's the sense of pursuit here, in that Jesus is actually, or the shepherd in both cases, is going after the sheep. And I think it's important. I think Jesus, particularly in the case of Luke, is making the case that he was being looked down upon for hanging around with these people, and Jesus is saying, well, if I didn't hang around with them, there's no way that they would ever be reconciled to God. So there's that point where he's actually making himself available to them.
Yeah, and I think that's where we definitely have the similarities in this parable. With Matthew and Luke, the focus really is about that proactive measures, diligent search that the shepherd takes. And it's a theological point of, just the depth and desire and care of God's love for those who've gone astray.
Yeah, exactly. Now there's a third parable in this one, the parable of the prodigal son, which we're very familiar with. That's a very famous one. We'll be talking that one. We've just talked about that one last Sunday.
Just so everyone knows, we're recording this before, so sometimes we got to remember our tenses.
And so in that particular case, the character portrayed by, or that is representative of God, the father in that case, doesn't actually pursue the son. He allows him to go on his own. But the minute the son has decided to come back, even though he's way off on the horizon, the father does run out to him. So again, it shows hammers home the point that God is very concerned with both the vulnerable, the unworthy, and the unimportant. So
yeah, and that's just it. He really does care about those groups. And I think the challenge for us is that possibly we may need to be better at facilitating that sort of thing. That love of, whether, again, the unimportant, the unworthy, the marginalized, all of that, because it's clear that God does care for them. And sometimes I don't know that we're always the best at stepping that stepping into that. We can be very, very, using the I guess this parable, the 99, focused on the 99, and again, that's not wrong, but to the exclusion of the one.
Right, exactly.
And that is wrong.
Yeah.
And we need to make sure that, like, that Jesus is saying, hey, I think those 99 they're safe.
Yeah.
The understanding would have been even as they heard this, that the shepherd wouldn't be out there alone. There would be a second or third person out there that he's left with those. Yeah,
particularly
99.
if there was 100 of them.
Yeah, and then the one would go out there. So there's an importance to that. So that moves us into, so that's, again, looking at both the Matthew and Luke kind of the parable. But then we go again, Luke, where Matthew stops and actually goes into more of how to be accountable, and the unforgiving debtor will come up very shortly after in the Matthew one. Luke immediately moves to the lost coin.
Yeah. And
we do see this sort of a male-female pairing. Kind of, we've seen that before with the mustard seed and the yeast an idea. And so then, but here we have coins.
Yep.
We have a silver coin, which
is, in this particular case, I know in one commentary I read on this is that it may not just have been a coin that was in her pocket for spending. Mm-hmm. It could possibly have been part of a marriage headdress.
Right.
And in that case, it has more of a sentimental value to the woman. And I think that's something, again, that Jesus is using an example like this so that women can relate to it. So it's about housekeeping and potentially a sentimental coin that is valuable to women, particularly in that culture.
Yeah, because a lot of the commentators also looked at this coin would have been essentially, so maybe it was to purchase a coin like that would have been about a day's wage.
Yep.
So, and this is where we don't really see the exaggerated money thing. Parables, Jesus tend to have like the exaggerated money with the idea of the parable of the talents, and he gives one, the other 2, and the other 3.
Yeah.
Like one of those is 15 years of an average wage. So that even the one is pretty significant.
Yeah.
And here's that day's wage.
Yeah.
When it's the unforgiving servant.
The guy who owes $8 billion.
Well, it's 10,000 talents.
Yeah.
One talent is 15 years, and he's 10,000 in debt. Like
that's a big exaggeration.
It's a big, and here he is just like, oh, here's to replace that, it would be a day's wage.
Yeah.
Which is sort of like, it's significant.
Yep.
But like we could budget to make that work kind of idea. Like it's.
Yeah, there isn't the same urgency to recover it as it is in the other ones to pay back the debt.
Exactly. It's just like, and again, not to knock, and again, even with the sheep, it's like it's 1 in 99. Like, I'm not saying that sheep isn't like, no big deal kind of, but it's like, it's 1 out of 99. I think that's kind of where we've got here is this, it's not necessarily hugely expensive, but what is the response?
Yeah, and the response is the same. So Jesus is making the point. He seems to be making the point twice, in case we didn't get it the first time, that the one is important to him. And it's, if, like you just said, if we neglect the one, then that is wrong.
Yeah. And even, again, it's moving to this diligent and proactive searching.
Yeah.
I mean, she's using the lamp. Whatever she has available to her, she's using that and just sort of not resting until it's found. And again, so when we talk about, I think what I find interesting, probably with a sheep too, but definitely with a coin, is it's an inanimate object. So we're not really supposed to focus on why the coin was lost.
Yeah.
I think with the sheep, it's like sheep tend to wander.
Yep.
That's
sheep aren't that bright.
That's kind of the point. It's sort of like, well, why did the sheep? Well, the sheep got distracted, food, whatever.
Yep.
The coin. Well, the coin doesn't move on its own because the point is the importance of God's diligent searching, his love, his desire for what's missing. It's a point to God.
Yeah.
And then to see that the exaggeration in this point in both stories, but definitely this one, is not the money, because we said it's a day's wage. The exaggeration is like, would you really throw a party? Like invite all your friends and neighbors? It's like, I found my one sheep, or I found this coin that I lost. We didn't know you lost it.
Yeah.
Like it wasn't necessarily our big concern.
Yeah.
And you're throwing a party for it. And I think that's the exaggeration part, is to point how excited the that who have found what was lost would be, well, that is what heaven is like.
Yeah,
And-
I really think that speaks to God's view of us as people, and particularly of His creation that have chosen not to follow Him, is that they're still extremely important to Him, and He wants to have a relationship with us. And when that relationship is restored, then it creates a lot of joy for God.
Yeah.
And I think that's something we sometimes can take for granted.
Yeah. And that joy is even found in whatever, in our societal hierarchies, whatever they might be, that those that just don't make the mark, that might be deemed unimportant or
Yeah.
unworthy, whatever that might be, whether it's a racial thing, whether it's a poverty, that sort of thing, is like, no, Jesus sees the value in that, and there's a party.
Yeah. He sees them as people.
Yes.
Quite often I would say, we hear of homeless statistics maybe, and if it goes up by 1 or 2% or down by 1 or 2%, we don't really get too concerned about that. It's just a number we hear about,
Yeah.
where really there's actual people involved.
There's
in that.
stories going on there,
And there's people's
it-
lives.
It's not just it's not just a number.
Yeah.
Like there's some real big stories.
Mm-hmm.
And I think we really, it can allow us to I think view ourselves in this light,
Mm-hmm.
but probably even more importantly, or just as importantly, maybe it's better to say it, is to how to view others in
Yeah.
this light. And I think it really comes back to we'll say original designation of humanity, is that we are image bearers.
Yep.
And
are
we
made
need
in
to
God's
start,
image,
we need to start seeing each other
Like that way, yeah.
in that way.
Oh, I really like that, yeah.
And so everyone, no matter what, is your dignity and your value is starts with, even ends with, not what you're capable of, what you do, what you bring. It's simply you are an image bearer of God.
Of God, yeah. Or even what you've done. Because
Yeah.
lots of times we'll write people off for what they've done.
That's right.
And God doesn't see it that way. Everybody is redeemable. And if you are following along and you haven't had a chance to listen to our live stream on Sunday, we do go into the third parable in this series, the prodigal son, which is, it elaborates more on this point. Gives
It
more
does.
detail.
It digs deeper for sure, and I think adds that human element that we need to see, and probably answer some of the questions that sort of like, okay, that was a sheep, that was a coin, but aren't we far more complicated?
Yes.
And it's like, yes,
We
we
definitely
are.
are. So hopefully you've enjoyed this podcast today, and that you've been able to learn something about the parables of Jesus, and maybe just had a chance to reflect and think about something maybe that we already know. Sometimes I think it's not that we need to learn something new. It's just we need to be reminded of something we already know. And again, this is our sort of take on it. And if you have learned something you'd like to share, please make a note in the comments. We'd love to hear your take on this parable, or something that you've been taught that we may have missed or overlooked. We're always looking to get a discussion going in those areas. And as always, we're trying to remind you that the best way to sort of work this into your life is to take a few minutes and reflect on it. To that end, we've put together some notes on the what we talked about today, and a reflection question or two that allows you to kind of continue to process this on your own. And again, we would encourage you to do that with a friend over coffee, or if you're part of our church community in your missional communities when you get together during the week. So thanks again for joining us. Please like and subscribe to the channel to help us keep making this content, and I hope we'll see you next time.